Do plants have consciousness? Welcome to Philosopher's Corner. I'm John. Do plants have consciousness? It's a question people have been asking for a long time. The idea being, is there something intelligent inside of plants? Are they more akin to a being than just a inanimate biological object? And how would we know? So, to begin with, we know that plants have movements, we know they're biological, we know they have life cycles, and we know that they react to external stimuli. That part we know. We know that if you put a plant in a corner and there's a ray of sunshine that can only be gotten if it moves to it, we know that the plant will move to the sunshine, right? So we know that they do react to stimuli, and they react to stimuli in a number of manners. They can reach for water, they can grow the roots deeper for it, and we know that they can stretch for sunlight and other things. Does that demonstrate consciousness? To scientists, no. To scientists, that's just, there's some built-in, essentially, electromagnetism or some force in there that compels the movement of the growth of the plant, right? So how do we figure out if the plant has consciousness? What do we look at? What kind of evidence are we looking for? Well, we'd essentially need looking for evidence that it's making some sort of autonomous decision that results in intelligent behavior. Which is, admittedly, it's a pretty high bar, but asking if something has consciousness is a pretty high bar. So one of the things we can see that demonstrates a level of what I would say is consciousness is when scientists study root systems for trees, they find that trees, although on the surface are separate and have space between them, when you go underneath and you go into the root systems are interconnected, and that they weave a community of roots, which they have found to be in direct communication with each other. Now, I believe it had something to do with the mushrooms that grow in the area of forests also act as almost like, I don't want to say neural pathways, but or synapses, but they act in a information transfer capacity for these root systems. And there's actually a whole ecosystem that springs out of these things, but the root systems, they see, lead to direct communication amongst these tree communities, and they can go for expansive amounts of miles. Forests of communication between these trees. And they find that not only are these trees communicating with each other, but they're distributing resources amongst each other. That they're figuring out ways to share the water, or how to grow into the soil and the nutrients, and they actually are acting as an actual community that are somehow figuring out how to distribute resources and share the area and communicate information with each other, which to me is a symptom of consciousness, and not just reaction to external stimuli, and doesn't seem like it could just be a rote reaction to the environment. It seems as that, because in each of the different cases where they study this, the management of the resources is different in the areas, and dependent upon the context of the environment and of the resources present in the environment, which would be a strong indicator of some sort of consciousness occurring. Now, there are lots of plants that demonstrate these types of unique abilities to interact with their environment in different manner, right? Like you have some that open up, you know, at the right times for certain things, and then close down in defensive postures. And well, you know, let's just skip right to it. If we look at the human history of interaction with plants and trees, many of the great moments in human history, of the most enlightening moments in human history, have come with humans sitting underneath trees. Right? Buddha famously did, Isaac Newton famously did, and a whole slew of other great thinkers have sat in the aural field of a tree and become enlightened. So there's got to be something to that. There's a life force that emanates from trees, all plants, but trees specifically, that has been well documented. And human consciousness has been the beneficiary of the fruits of the consciousness of the trees that many of the humans who have been attuned to the trees have sat under. And that really does need to be admitted into the human intellectual journey. And if it were only just those two instances, that would be enough. Buddha and Newton. I mean, those are two of the biggest contributions to the human consciousness to ever exist. And they're both intricately and famously linked to individual humans being attuned to a tree. That alone should let people know that there's some sort of consciousness occurring within trees, and then by extension into plants. Now, it's the same as within humans, or the same as within animals when we're trying to scan the spectrum of them all for consciousness. It's not that there's various ranges of consciousness, and some demonstrate maybe none. But where we're at in our evolution, getting to a point to admit that a tree or a plant of any, at least one, has consciousness of some kind is a breakthrough. Now, can we require a tree or a plant to demonstrate problem-solving ability? I think that might be a bit much to ask of a tree or a plant. You can't expect them to fashion a tool to solve a problem or to do complex mathematics. As the most conscious beings and the most hyper-aware of consciousness beings on the planet, it's up to Homo sapiens and human beings to construct litmus tests that account for the limitations of plants and trees when gauging if they have consciousness. Our ability to probe into them and come away edified needs to be admitted as a legitimate test. Just because trees and plants have limitations on their physical beingness in relation to how us as humans traditionally like to test and measure other beings, needs to be wiped away. We need to assume the responsibility of being a very capable, conscious being and incorporate that into what our tests are, especially for trees and plants. and to say, okay, since we're human beings and we have this empathetic ability to be able to phase shift and vibe transfer consciousness from other things, which is a well-established fact through millennia of human existence across all the earth. In fact, it may be our chief heightened ability is to empathetically transfer consciousness from other things to ourselves to be able to gain information. We need to apply that version of the test when it comes to trees and plants. And in that sense, the answer is very clear that yes, trees and plants to some degree, some to very demonstrable degrees, and others maybe not at all, but at least for the indication that do any trees or plants have consciousness, yes, I think it's very clear that they do. And it's very clear that when people do the tests and when they get the data from growing all sorts of plants and trees and flowers and vegetation, that they respond to positive intention, and that they hold within their structural memory positive intentions, and that their behavior changes based on positive or negative. When they do the studies where when people talk to the plants in a certain way, then they react a certain way. And then when they play certain types of music, when they play harmonious music, they get different growths. And when they play disharmonious music, they don't. And I know some people will say, well, that's still reaction to external stimuli. And some of it is, but there is intent in there. And the reaction to the intent demonstrates some consciousness. Because consciousness doesn't necessarily have to be a highly interactive thing. A consciousness can be like a pool of water. It's a web of consciousness that just moves at a different rate. And it doesn't have to react in the same way. It doesn't have to react in a human-centric way to demonstrate that it is in fact conscious. But the burden of responsibility falls on us as humans to discern what reactions are occurring from them, and then to determine whether or not it implies consciousness on the part of the tree, the plant, the flower, the whatever. And referencing before where Buddha and Newton spent time with trees in a highly open and empathetic manner using human ability, and they came away inspired and enlightened with tangible information of consciousness that was not previously in them. It needs to be rightly attributed to their communication with the tree. And in that sense, they have communicated it. Now, I guess somebody could say, well, the trees they're just channeling the consciousness. They're like a bioantenna. Well, then I would say yes. Go back to what I previously said and say that the expression of it being consciousness doesn't have to fall into an animated human test. Like I said, with the trees already, their root systems are already demonstrating that they're part of some sort of aware community. It goes beyond just rote biological algorithms occurring. It's consciousness interacting with its environment in a way that we're discovering. Humanity is still an evolving species, and hopefully it continues to evolve for a very long time. And our chief means of evolving is the exploration of the consciousness, and then the consciousness can be transferred back into our biological bodies, and then the biological bodies can evolve based on the evolution of the consciousness. And in that sense, our relationship with trees and plants and flowers has really just begun. Now, some of the more ancient cultures, they've done much more of this exploration. and they know what's going on with it much more. And if you talk to a shaman or a medicine man or an Ayurvedic practitioner, they'll tell you that what I'm saying is probably kindergartner stuff. But it's important to establish the fundamentals here. And I'm not saying every single plant, tree, and flower is like alive, like Disney style. But I will tell you that way more of them are than aren't. And philosophically, to enter it into the human consciousness, all we need are a few prime examples, which, like I said with Buddha and Newton, I believe that we have. Well, it's philosophy, so it's open source thinking. So it's really up to you to figure it out. I hope you found it helpful. Thanks for spending some time here at Philosopher's Corner. It's always a pleasure to have you. And as always, have fun.